Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We're ready to begin now. I would like you to join me in welcoming our webcast viewers, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation. My name is Colleen Kennedy, the Executive Director of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Our club continues to offer a forum for leaders, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas with us. We strive to represent not only a diversity of thoughts and perspectives, but of speakers as well. We offer access to engaging political business and public figures like today's speaker. Before I formally introduce him, here's a quick snapshot of some of our upcoming events. On Thursday, April 5th, we will host a dynamic panel celebrating Indigenous youth achievement. It will be a riveting event, and I hope to see you there. And on Monday, April 23rd, we have Ontario's Premier Kathleen Wynne, just in advance of the election call, so you won't want to miss that either. To order tickets or to learn more about the club, visit us at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation by following us on Twitter or Instagram at CDNCLUBTO or using that hashtag. At this time, I would like to thank today's event sponsors, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, represented by Paul Daly, and First Golf, represented by David Jarofsky. We really appreciate your support. I would also like to acknowledge the youth and young leaders we have here today from Centennial College's journalism program. We're expecting some really great questions from all of you. Thank you for being here. And now our guest speaker. The number of cold weather advisories issued this winter signaled how important housing is for all of us. You may know someone who is housing challenged, or perhaps a young family member is bemoaning the affordability of new home ownership or renting. In the next 2 years, Ontario's Ministry of Housing plans to spend almost $339 million on homelessness prevention. Its affordable housing budget is $343 million. The Honourable Peter Milczyn oversees a ministry that works to tackle the challenges that I just mentioned. Whether it's funding the cost of creating and repairing affordable rental units, settling rent increase guidelines, or responding to complaints, the minister has a lot on his plate. This includes working with municipal and community partners to implement the long-term affordable housing strategy. Minister Milczyn serves as housing minister as well as the minister responsible for the province's poverty reduction strategy. He's been at Queen's Park since 2014 and represents the Etobicoke Lakeshore riding. Before his current ministerial roles, he held a number of parliamentary assistant posts, including labor, infrastructure, and economic development. Prior to entering provincial politics, the U of T architecture graduate founded a design firm, worked for a nonprofit housing corporation, and represented Etobicoke in municipal politics for many years. Congratulations. Members and guests, I remind you to use the Q&A cards provided to ask a question of today's guests. Minister Milczyn, the Canadian Club Toronto podium is yours.
So good afternoon, everybody. I hope you had a good lunch. I will try my very best not to spoil it for you, so you leave here in just as good spirits as you arrived. Thank you, Colleen, for the very kind introduction. Thank you to our sponsors today for support of this event and support of a lot of other important city building events throughout the city. As Colleen mentioned in my bio, I'm on the cusp of becoming, I guess, an angry old white man soon. Hopefully not the angry part. But I have been involved in housing and urban issues now for close to 30 years. So I have given it a great deal of thought, and my life's work essentially And so I think I've seen what we've been doing well. I know what we have yet failed to do, and I think I have some good insight on what we know will be successful if we do it in the future. And it's certainly a great privilege to be here as Minister of Housing and the Minister responsible for the Poverty Reduction Strategy. And I thank the Canadian Club for the opportunity to speak to you about the issues that I'm charged with dealing. It's a great tradition that you've honed over these many years, and as you move to new digs, I hope that this tradition is continuing. So I want to talk to you today about housing, affordable housing, stable housing, and housing that should be in reach for everyone. And we've taken action with the Fair Housing Plan, a series of measures to make life more affordable for both home buyers and renters. And I'd like to take you back to the not-so-distant past. It was the beginning of 2016. The housing market really started to heat up. And those who are hoping to buy a home, or even those who are looking to rent a home, the picture wasn't very rosy. Housing prices started to skyrocket, especially in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and Toronto and the GTA in particular. And these soaring prices fundamentally spoke about the economic strength of Ontario, the growing population of many of our communities. But nonetheless, the prices were rising far faster than the fundamental underlying demand was. These prices were creating a real barrier to entry to the housing market for far too many families. People were being priced out of the housing market, especially those who were trying to purchase their first home. To achieve their dream, they had to make difficult choices. Sometimes it was moving far away from family and friends and their workplace to a community that would be more affordable. It might mean renting much longer to try and catch up with what would inevitably be a chase to try and come up with that initial down payment. And of course with this also contributed to an already tight rental market becoming even tighter, and vacancy rates plummeted even further. And so what we then saw is with many tenants, with the very buoyant rental market out there, renters started to see some situations which had not been seen for a long time. They were facing skyrocketing rent increases from landlords in this very changing market. Now, of course, much of this was in the condo rental market, not the traditional rental market. So this wasn't a simple problem. There was a series of compounding effects, a mix of increasing demand, exploding speculation, limited supply, and lack of diverse new housing options and low new, rental vacancy rates. So we had to take some action because everyone in Ontario should have access to an affordable place to rest their head at night. It's very fundamental to each of us that we have a place to call home, a place to share with our family, a place to seek some refuge from daily life. But when faced with the choice of spending far too much on your mortgage, or far too much in your rent, or even just struggling to find any place to live in at all, it requires some government intervention. So in 2016, our government took one of its first steps. We recognized that first-time home buyers were really struggling to keep up with rising prices. So we doubled the land transfer tax rebate to eligible first-time home buyers from $2,000 to $4,000. We knew that this, although not a huge amount, was sending a signal to people that we do want them to participate in the housing market, and we will do what we can to make it somewhat easier. We followed up in 2017 with our Fair Housing Plan, a comprehensive package of 16 measures that is helping to make housing more affordable for Ontarians. It's a multifaceted strategy that addresses a number of issues surrounding rising housing costs. It was meant to bring greater stability to a real estate market which was spiraling out of control but we wanted to do it in a way that would continue to protect the investment that homeowners have already made. So the Fair Housing Plan addresses these broad action areas in a number of ways: housing demand, increasing the supply of housing, and protecting renters and home buyers. So on the demand side, we introduced a 15% non-resident speculation tax on home buyers who are not residents or citizens of Canada and on foreign corporations. The evidence to date suggests that that is helping to reduce investor speculation and helping to moderate price increases. We do know that this class of foreign buyers has diminished somewhat in the GTA. We're also working with the federal government to better understand and tackle speculative practices, such as the assignment of new home purchase agreements, which may contribute to tax avoidance and excessive foreign and domestic speculation in the housing market. That's also helping to address housing availability and affordability, because that means average people who just want to buy a home to live in may have greater access to those if they're not bought up in advance through brokers or other agents that are selling units in blocks. We also wanted to make sure that in this situation where there was such increased price spirals, that home buyers would be protected during their transaction of the real estate. So we introduced changes to Real Estate and Business Brokers Act to modernize the rules and address practices such as multiple representation. That's where the same real estate professional might represent both the buyer and the seller of a home. And I can tell you from my own experience of trying to buy a home in Toronto with my wife, we also participated in some bidding wars where we really kind of were left wondering, were there other bids? Who are those other bids from? So we wanted to make sure that we have a level playing field for everybody who's participating in trying to buy a home. In terms of trying to assist moving more supply into the market, we've created a housing delivery group to work with municipalities, developers, and other parties to bring specific new affordable housing developments to market faster. And this group aims to help individual projects overcome barriers in the approvals process at both the municipal and provincial level, as well as issues that are unique to each development site. Getting projects built faster will help more Ontario individuals, families, and seniors find the housing they need. And while helping to get specific projects built, we're also looking at the bigger picture. We established the Development Approval Roundtable made up of senior municipal, development, and real estate professionals, as well as key provincial staff from many ministries, to look at how the province can support housing development. And quite uniquely, this roundtable is actually chaired by the Secretary of Cabinet, who is the most senior provincial civil servant, who does have a background in planning, is actually very keenly interested in this. But it signaled our intent to make sure that we break down our own silos within the provincial government to ensure ministries are working together and advancing government policy all at the same time. So this roundtable did come up with a number of recommendations that we're attempting to implement both within our ministries in terms of better communication, coordination, speeding up timelines for environmental and other approvals. And we're working with our municipal partners on making sure there's better communication with them as well. As part of the Fair Housing Plan, we also released a 14-point action plan at the same time. So it includes engaging with municipalities and the development sector to explore opportunities to support forward-looking zoning bylaws and community planning permit systems. I can tell you as a former councillor, city councils get in the way of good development sometimes. Our role is to stop bad development, but we sometimes trip over ourselves in the process and slow down good development as well. Sometimes that's NIMBYism, sometimes that's just process, and we are looking at ways to improve that. But we also need to engage municipalities and provide them with tools to ensure that they can actually have stronger zoning bylaws and better planning in place at the outset of the process. Planning that would support provincial growth plans and provincial policies. So we know that that also contributes to some of our housing shortage. So while these reasons for this housing shortage are very complex, it's not rocket science. A significant factor of high housing prices and affordability issues is because we have a lack of supply of units and a lack of diversity of different unit types that people are looking for. So the way you fix a housing shortage is by building more housing. Apartments, condominiums, and houses, it's that simple. And we're starting to see demand catch up with supply, but it takes time to get new units approved and built. Our recent report from Urbanation showed that the number of proposed condominium units passed 380,000 last year. That's a 49% increase from 5 years ago, and it's an encouraging number. But the types of condo units proposed don't necessarily reflect the need for the housing of families or some of the affordability issues that we have. And that's a challenge that we need to address through intensification and other measures. The time it takes to get proposed new units approved and built means that housing market doesn't respond to demand as quickly as it could, and it doesn't respond to changing market conditions as it should. And we're seeing good ideas and work on how to deal with this problem coming from the private sector. I read with great interest the Toronto Region Board of Trade's Housing Policy Playbook, and I support the recommendations on improved zoning, faster approvals, and using surplus public lands for housing, including affordable housing. Their report emphasized that Toronto consistently ranks as one of the best places in the world to live and work, but that housing affordability for buyers and renters is one of our biggest challenges. So going forward, we need to look and implement ideas that increase the supply of housing for all. To encourage the development of more housing, we've created a housing delivery group to work with these municipalities. That is chaired by Paula Dill, somebody who has extraordinary experience in the public sector of getting things done. And I encourage any of you in the room that are in the business, when you get stuck, feel free to call upon her to help you break the log jam of different ministry approvals, municipal approvals, and other challenges that arise. We know that by helping to get these projects built faster, they will deliver the housing that we need. So we also, in terms of some of the issues that were raised by the Board of Trade, we brought them to the forefront in our Fair Housing Plan. We decided that it's high time to start releasing provincial surplus lands for housing, and especially to ensure that affordable housing is built. So to date, we've released 3 sites that will generate in excess of 2,000 purpose-built rental units, including up to 30% of affordable units. There will be a mix of housing, most for rent. There will be some units for sale as well. Some of the land is being sold. Some of it is being held by the province as long-term land leases. This will help build more homes for young professionals, seniors, individuals, and families. But moving forward, we have to continue to review provincial lands for sale. And I'm particularly interested in intensification around transit and transit corridors. And I call on all levels of government to systematically look at releasing their surplus public lands for more affordable housing. We've also taken steps to address some of the issues that government adds to the problem of affordability. So we have a 5-year plan to contribute up to $125 million for the rebate of development charges for purpose-built rental projects throughout the province. And I know there's a great deal of interest in that proposal. We've asked municipalities across the province to bring forward their interest in participating in that, and I hope to be able to announce very soon the allocation of those funds to different municipalities and regions. Over the next 5 years, we need to increase the number of purpose-built rental developments across the province, and certainly in the GTHA and some of our other key population centres. That's a very important part of the housing market. It's for many the entry point into the housing market, but it can increasingly also be a point in the housing market later on in life that could free up ownership homes for a younger generation to buy as our seniors age, and they could move on to good quality rental. So we will be working together with the Finance Department on further ideas that we could put in place to intensify the construction of rental housing across the province. But that being said, we also have to take care of our renters. We had to, through the Fair Housing Plan, increase protections for both tenants and landlords. Last month, I introduced a standard lease for all residential tenancies in the province. This is a plain language document in English and French, coupled with a guide in 21 languages to assist people in understanding their rights and obligations as a tenant. And it's going to level the playing field. It will ensure that every tenant in Ontario, whether they're renting for the first time or they're moving from apartment to apartment, they will know exactly what they are paying for, how much they're paying, who they are paying it to, and what all the rules surrounding their tenancy are. This is going to be a big help to tenants. It's also a big help to landlords by hopefully ensuring that there will be fewer disputes down the road. These new measures, coupled with some other changes to the Landlord and Tenant Act that we brought in around the same use evictions of tenants from units that were owned by a landlord, are meant to stabilize the rental supply, ensure that tenants know what their rights are, and that there's better protection for their rights. We know that by expanding rent controls to all rental units across the province, not just those built before 1991, that we extended rent control to an additional 237,000 households. And our annual rent increase guidelines are tied to inflation and other economic conditions. This year, that's 1.8%. But I know that wasn't necessarily the most popular position to take, both for the rental industry and for some of our opposition parties. But I have to say that I'm very concerned when I hear the Conservatives who have no housing or affordable housing policy in their rapidly shrinking platform, that they're continuing to talk about changing rent controls again. I don't see how that's going to help housing affordability. But I'm also very concerned with the New Democrats and their continuing calls to eliminate vacancy decontrol. That would also be very harmful to tenants and to landlords, and it would mean that the quality of our rental stock would only deteriorate. I think we've struck the right balance. So I know that rent control, while controversial to some, is a strong policy that does assist many Ontarians. The studies and the research have all borne that out. And what all of these measures come to is ensuring that we create more supply of housing, that we assist in the creation of a stronger diversity of different housing types and tenures, and that we try to do what we can in terms of controlling the affordability of housing for all Ontarians. So I know that our most recent data suggests that the Fair Housing Plan has begun to have some positive effect. The real estate market is stabilizing. Prices are not escalating beyond what we would normally have seen. Some of the frenzy that we saw with people desperate to buy something, buy anything, that has subsided. A more rational market is in place right now. So we know that year over year, we've had prices actually decrease somewhat, and that is a good thing for anybody trying to buy a home in the GTHA. Condo prices continue to increase, which is a signal of a very strong market and strong demand. But again, we need to encourage a bigger diversity of unit types to ensure that families also can find the housing they need in our communities across the GTHA and the province. We're going to continue to watch the market. We know that as it stabilizes, it will be easier for families and first-time home buyers to get into the market, but that doesn't mean that there isn't danger in the wind that we have to be aware of, and we have to ensure that our policies will adapt to changing market conditions. As a minister, before I was a minister, I introduced a private member's bill that many of you in this room might be aware of. It included some changes to how we do planning in this province and also called on the province to implement inclusionary zoning. And one of the first tasks that I had on my plate as Minister of Housing was to look at the inclusionary zoning and how we could structure a policy that would work for Ontario. So for those of you who perhaps aren't aware, inclusionary zoning is a tool that helps to increase the supply of affordable housing to low and moderate income families and individuals and helps create more integrated and inclusive communities. It allows municipalities to require developers to set aside a certain number of units as housing that is affordable in new construction. And our neighborhoods will only be stronger when we have a greater range of people living in them with a variety of housing options. People need that stability and the affordability and the access to homes in the communities that they work in, that they want to live in, where their children go to school in or they go to school in. So inclusionary zoning can help assist with that. Now, there's been a lot of very vigorous debate about the inclusionary zoning draft regulations that were put out. I've been listening very carefully to all the feedback that I've been getting. I've been personally meeting with municipalities, with stakeholder groups, with development industry representatives, because we want to create an inclusionary zoning framework for the province that will deliver on affordable housing, but do it in a way that is reasonable and rational and actually reflects real market conditions. So the options that we have before us are going to be finalized in the coming weeks. I'm sure all of you will be waiting with bated breath to find out where we're going, but I can tell you that we will put in place a framework that will provide some flexibility for municipalities, but with some strong direction on levels of affordability and what we believe is reasonable given current market conditions. So inclusionary zoning is just one of the aspects of what we're doing to encourage municipalities to help create more affordable units. Secondary suites, or in many cases basement apartments, are another important part of that overall affordable housing strategy. And municipalities must allow second units in detached, semi-detached row houses and ancillary structures. And we want to support municipalities that are amending their official plans to permit and encourage second units. But I think it's also coming to the point where we don't want any municipalities standing in the way of implementing that policy. We're also changing the building code to reduce construction costs for these secondary units in new homes. These secondary units in many communities are the best option for affordability. But that's not enough. We want municipalities to start being more creative and permissive with their zoning that would allow for a broader range of homes. That could be communal housing, could be rooming houses, tiny homes or micro-lofts, laneway housing, or vertical stratification of existing homes. There are many ways that our communities could add affordable housing in gentle, less intensive, and affordable ways. And we're also using tax incentives to improve housing affordability for both landlords and tenants. We've frozen municipal property taxes on rental apartment buildings in communities where these taxes are too high. And we're making the property tax rate for new multi-residential apartment buildings the same as for all other types of residential property. That's just fair. That's what fair housing looks like. And we've also now partnered with the federal government to increase the supply of affordable housing in the province. Since 2011, with an investment of over $1 billion in the Investment in Affordable Housing program, we've created and repaired over 20,000 affordable housing units. On top of that, we've helped over 18,000 households with rental and down payment assistance. And this longer-term partnership is only going to be strengthened with the federal government's commitment to a national housing strategy. Ottawa heard the call of Ontario and communities across Ontario to preserve baseline funding for all of our existing social housing stock. That's also very important. We have to preserve and protect the affordable housing we already have. So we know that, thank you, Harvey. I'm sure that was Harvey. So we know that there was some concern that our existing affordable housing stock could become less affordable, and we've worked hard to make sure that would that would continue to be affordable. And of course, we've also invested $653 million, $343 million of that here in the City of Toronto to support the retrofit and repair of our existing social housing stock. We have all heard far too many stories about the state of disrepair of social housing. That's not acceptable. We have stepped up, and through our cap and trade program, generated revenues that can be applied for the energy efficiency and retrofit of social housing. In most cases, that means the already necessary repairs can be effected, and those buildings will be cheaper to operate and more comfortable to live in as a result. But there's one other issue around housing affordability that really is a heartbreaking one. And as Minister of Housing, it's something that I take very much to heart. And that's that there's far too many people experiencing homelessness in the city and in communities across the province. And I volunteer in my community in many ways, and I like to see what's happening. And I recently was at All Saints Kingsway Anglican Church at Prince Edward in Royal York, and Prince Edward and Bloor in my riding, and I helped out with the Out of the Cold program one evening. So while I was serving dinner to these ladies and gentlemen, one man introduced himself, he recognized me, said, "Hi, Peter," and he goes, "I remember your mother." So I said, "Well, how do you remember my mother?" "Well, I was her neighbor." And that really struck it home for me. So what is the distance traveled between living in a home in your community and then not having a home? It's perhaps not as great as we might think it is. And that's why it's extremely important that the people on our streets and in our shelters, that they're treated with respect and dignity. They are human beings, they're our friends, they're our neighbors. And we have to set ourselves ambitious goals to make sure that homelessness, chronic homelessness, is no longer a reality in this province. And that's what we've done. By 2025, we intend to eradicate chronic homelessness in this province. We've done this in a number of ways, and that is in investing in more supportive housing, transitional housing, working with municipalities on delivering programs that are tailored to their unique circumstances. Last fall, I announced $200 million for our Homes for Good program, and in Toronto, that translates into $90 million to fund the City of Toronto's plan to end chronic homelessness. Not just some of it, but to fund their entire plan. That is our commitment. And of course, this past winter, when we had cold alerts, again, the province stepped up when we were called upon to provide assistance as required, to make surplus provincial buildings available as emergency shelters, and to work with Toronto and other municipalities on helping them deal with that crisis. So all of these things that I'm talking about, that speak to a couple of fundamental things for our province. They talk about fairness and they talk about opportunity. And we're very busy working on ensuring that there's fairness and opportunity for every Ontarian. Whether they want to buy a home, rent a home, whether they want to get an education or get a better job, or just be able to make ends meet better. Everything that we do is focused on those key pillars of fairness and opportunity. We've raised the minimum wage, and that's helping people pay their rent, buy their food, and not fall further behind. We've extended free tuition to close to 1/3 of all Ontario post-secondary students this year. And for the first time, that's not just people, young people leaving high school. Any Ontarian of any age can participate in that. That's a commitment to making sure that every Ontarian has the opportunity to get an education, upgrade their skills, and make the opportunity they want to make for themselves in this province. We've also taken the lead to begin expanding pharmacare by extending pharmacare to those under 25. And certainly it is our hope that now the federal government will follow our lead, expand that nationwide, and expand it to all Canadians. So as we work on helping to deliver fairness and opportunity to all Ontarians, I continue to remain committed in the coming weeks and well beyond to ensure that our housing policies reflect that we ensure we build housing that people need, that we ensure that housing can be built in this province the way it needs to be built in a reasonable and timely way, and that we all work together on delivering on these promises. I know that in the coming weeks we'll start talking more and more about politics, and it doesn't really matter to me who the opponent on the other side is, whether it's Ms. Elliott or Ms. Mulroney or Mr. Ford. We know where they stand. They don't support an increased minimum wage. They don't want to support policies that address climate change. They don't want to support finding ways to invest in the infrastructure and the improvements that we need. And so while it's been my privilege so far to be working alongside my colleagues in government and municipalities across the province, I also remember the days when I was a city councillor and there was a government that cut all funding for transit, for infrastructure, for housing, and a number of other needs. So, as I started out saying earlier on, I've been at this a long time. I'm getting to that point where, you might call me an angry old white guy. I'm not angry, but I am in for a fight. And I will fight to make sure that we continue to provide housing for Ontarians, provide transit and infrastructure for Ontarians, and make sure we do that in a coordinated way, working in partnership with the private sector and all of our municipal partners. Thank you very much.
Questions? Thank you so much, Minister. I'll be honest, I think you're the first politician that hasn't mentioned the Leafs at the podium. I think, can you believe it?
Well.
So, do you choose Leafs or Raptors? Do you cheer for?
Absolutely the Leafs.
The Leafs. All right.
This is the year for the Leafs.
I'll let you, that's great. We don't have time for all your questions. Thank you all for sending them up. But I was going to start easy, but maybe I'll start a little harder. There may be ways to address the shortage of supply of rental by looking at HST rules. Does the province have any plan to do so?
That's an excellent question. I know it's come up many times over the years. That's certainly something that as we work with the federal government on the national housing strategy, I think that's another aspect of some of the measures that we could be considering. There's no immediate plan to address that, but I think it would be best addressed if the two levels of government did that together.
Thank you. So given your observations on how municipal councils sometimes block good planning, are you concerned that Bill 139 will lead to even more local influence for NIMBYs with decreased recourse of an appeal?
So Bill 139, of course, is the reforms to planning in Ontario and the appeal mechanism, the elimination of the Ontario Municipal Board, and its replacement with the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. The idea behind the changes we brought about is to ensure that appeals would be around fundamental policy. So municipalities' refusal to approve development that complies with its own official plan or with provincial policy, or an applicant who, notwithstanding the official plan and provincial policy, wants to do something that dramatically exceeds or changes that. So we think that what we have done, and the truth will be in the pudding once the local planning appeal is up and running shortly, we think we will actually speed up the process, that with a little bit more discipline, some of the speculative land ambitions of certain developers might be curtailed because they know that the appeals would be limited to something more reasonable. And I'm also hopeful that municipalities will also, with more power, have more discipline and actually do the right thing. In some of our policies, notably the inclusionary zoning framework, we actually want to incent municipalities that if they do upfront zoning, which is then, of course, harbored from appeal, that there's actually financial incentives for them to do that. It's a big culture change, but I do believe that we've done something that will bring a little bit more discipline to both sides of the equation.
Okay, last question. So 5 years from now, what is in place and what does success look like for affordable housing in Ontario?
So 5 years from now, we would have been building, hopefully, between 10 to 20,000 rental units each and every year, and that will be continuing. We will have ended chronic homelessness by having the right supports in place for people that we can transition them into a home and then help them stay there by making sure whether it's mental health or disability supports or other community supports that we can actually help sustain people in their homes. And of course that we continue to have one of the most vibrant, most fastest growing construction and development markets anywhere in North America, that we continue to have cranes in the sky across the GTA, but that we grow in a way that we also align it better with our infrastructure and our transit.
Thank you so much. Minister Milczyn, on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I would like to thank you for outlining your ministry's plan to make affordable housing a reality for all Ontarians. I hope to be here in 5 years and see all of your plans realized. Housing is essential for everyone. Too many people are adversely impacted by the growing pressures of trying to buy a home or afford their rent. We really appreciate the perspectives you offered on our current housing market and the trends and factors that are driving supply and demand. Your government's efforts to tackle homelessness is admirable. We know there are thousands of people waiting for anticipation for workable solutions for this challenge. Please accept our warmest wishes for continued success in your ministerial role and in the election. Before we conclude, I would like to thank VVC and MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for live streaming today's event. You're welcome to go into our website. You can watch it anytime or any of our past or future events online. To learn more about the club, canadianclub.org. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful day. We hope to see you soon.